Keith Locke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Green Party does support this bill. We were part of a very thorough Select Committee process that dramatically transformed the content of the bill into a risk-based approach, and we worked closely with across all parties and with the banking sector, and the final result was a risk-based system which was fairly close to that applied by Australian banks. And what it means in the last analysis is that instead of the banks having to run around getting multiple sources of identification from low-paid beneficiary customers, people who are more transient and wasting all their time on people that wouldn't even have the resources to be money launderers, now they're able to concentrate on those people who really are a problem. And it is going to reduce money laundering. In the Select Committee we had examples presented to us of how people shift money around from country to country, Pacific Islands, Australia, New Zealand, and get a big advantage, tax advantage and other advantages by shifting the money around through dummy accounts. So this bill will improve that situation and I think increase tax receipts for the New Zealand Government, Australian Government, governments of the Pacific Islands in our region in any case. And the implementation of these procedures as a result of the Financial Action Task Force proposals has reduced, I think, money laundering, corruption, funny money sort of dealings in some of the smaller island states, including in the Pacific. But it probably hasn't gone far enough to really deal with one of the problems that is at the core of the current financial crisis we have, and that is the huge amount of money in tax haven countries, drawing not much tax at all, in fact denying the home countries of the particular investors from that tax take. And the New Internationalist magazine estimates $11.5 trillion or $11,500 billion in these tax havens, and that means a huge amount of tax that could really be of benefit to those countries, or particularly the poorer countries in the world, disappearing into the pockets of people already multimillionaires or billionaires. So I'm not sure that the Financial Action Task Force and this bill will fully deal with that situation, partly because the Financial Action Task Force itself is an organisation of rich countries. It isn't a UN organisation. It specifically isn't a UN organisation. It's an OECD or rich country organisation. So I think there's probably some way to go before we really deal with that problem that's hitting the world in terms of the financial crisis. It is true, I think, that the FATF work is reducing corruption internationally, and of course I suppose one of the aims from a rich investor's point of view is to make countries safer for investment, to reduce the overheads in terms of corruption in particular countries, and it's a good thing that corruption is being reduced. The other element to the bill, which is in the title of the bill, is countering financing of terrorism. Exactly how that's going to work, it's a bit unclear. We don't have a large number of terrorists in New Zealand at the present time, and one of the problems when I asked the when I asked the officials, I said, well, which terrorist lists are we using, and which, terrorist lists are used to filter the banking transactions, and they said the American lists, basically. And the American list is a pretty big list, tens of hundreds of thousands of people on their list, and we have a case a few years ago of a chap up in Auckland, Mohammed Abbas, who was sending money to his sick relatives in India from Auckland, and he did it through Western Union, and somehow it all got checked in America on the way through, and he had a hell of a job getting the money to his relatives, because there was somebody else on the list called Mohammed Abbas, and it's a fairly common name in the Muslim world. So that's an illustration of some of the problems you can come up against. And then one of the other aspects that we were talking about in the Select Committee is the way financial transactions are done internationally, and basically they all pass through what's known as the SWIFT system, which is a system which has two data processing centres, very big centres, one in Europe and one in the United States, and they mirror each other for 124 days before the information is stored in a backup facility. And one of the problems they've solved it partly now, there's a big battle between the US and the EU over this, is that because one of the data centres was sitting in the United States, the US Treasury was saying, well, give us information on this, that and the other thing, and they were doing what was described by the Europeans as carpet sweeping. That is, they were getting a whole array of information on these transactions that wasn't particularly targeted to people that they could prove were a terrorist danger, and some of the information they were seeking wasn't related to US transactions, that is, transactions originating in the US or finishing in the US. It was sometimes just internal transactions within European Union countries, and the European Union countries were a bit upset that some of their internal transactions were being demanded by the United States government off the SWIFT organisation. And most of New Zealand's banking transactions and reconciliations go through this SWIFT system with all the details, the name, the amount, etc., attached to them. So there's still possibly a few problems to be worked out there in terms of privacy, in terms of which terrorist definition you apply when you filter the financial transaction information, etc., but the Green Party, despite concerns about that dimension of it, does support this bill as a good way of combating the scourge of money laundering and the criminal activities that go with it. Thank you.